Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Raging Loop on Nintendo Switch.
Haru-chan は Haru-chan だ。神様も含めて Haru-chan だ。
社ができるまで我も守ってくれるか。
Haru-chan のついでにね。やっすん、そういうことでいい？
ああ、僕の妹をよろしく頼む。
じっちゃん、
その格好をなんとかせ。
チェ。Haru-chan は？
これからのモッチー次第。
オッケー。
あとここまでありがとう、春秋。
ま、そういうことだから。
ああ、
Goodbye, Haru-chan.
一つ連絡です。これが済んだら皆さん10分以内に最低限の荷物をまとめて皿長に降りてください。そこに僕の妻がいます。彼女の指示に従って脱出してください。
Everyone complied.
あと狼じじいさん、あなただけ広場に残っててください。さて、ごめんね、待たせて。芹沢千恵美さん、
嫌よ。
君のこれまでは神様の意を狩る外道の悪意によって踏みにじられた人生だった。
嫌だって言ってるでしょ。
君は恐れもだえ苦しみ、周りと衝突をしながらも力を求めた。強くあるための力を求め続けた。その結果、君には僕らや神様が見えるようになった。
あなたは神様じゃない。
その結果、君は神を手にかける資格を得るに至った。
神様は殺せない。
普通はそうだ。でも殺せないわけじゃない。名を与え、後継を廃し、その資格を受けし英雄が生まれ、そのための武器を手に取れば、
Basically, make everyone agree.
神は殺せる。資格は他ならぬ僕が与えよう。いや、僕の娘、こっちへおいで。
あなたをやりたくなんかない。
I called Mako over and hugged her tightly.
さあ、構えなさい。
A sawed-off shotgun slipped out of her sleeve. She couldn't resist at all.
ここまで本当によく頑張りました。
At this moment, I felt like I was speaking for someone other than me.
これで最後のお願いです。撃ちなさい。
The barrel spewed fire, and my body, still holding Mako, soared into the air. Not like I could actually die, though.
すっごい面白い。
マジでどういう神経してんだ君は。一応聞こえたらまずいからしーね。
し
よしよし、いい子。
ちょっと悪い。
学習能力すごすぎるぞ。
Basically, I just bungee jumped backwards the moment Jamie fired. The rope couldn't be too long because we could end up hitting the cliff, so it was only about 10 meters long, but it was a bungee jump nonetheless. I'd prepared the rope during the little time I had after getting the mask. I only had one shot at this, and it actually worked out. With this, God was dead. Great Lord Shinai, Yamatsu Okami, the two-faced god of fear and oppression, was killed by a fitting stage and a decent plot. He spoke his last words for each of the weak yet good people of Yasumizu. He understood them well and encouraged them to follow a different path. Then he reconciled with the true god, the one given the dirty name of Badger, and passed on the rites. They no longer had a reason to fear the mist, blindly follow the fake laws of the mountain, or kill each other because of some legends. They would never hold the Feast of the Yomi Purge again. So, Mission 1, stop the people of Yasumizu from killing each other in the feast, had been completed. Even Chaimi, who was so afraid of the great Lord Shinai and God, had literally defeated the source of her fear. I could only hope it fixed her murderous side, too. Anyway, the sun had sunk. We had to move before it was completely dark. I switched to the other rope I had here and went down to Sadanaga. Alright, we've made it down, but what was I to do with Maiko? Considering the story I made up, I couldn't bring her with me. Alright, I'll just make her wait.
メイコちゃん、この後しばらくそこの岩の陰で待っててもらえるかい？
どれくらい？
2、3時間かな。寝ててもいいけど、他の人が来ても出てきちゃダメだよ。
お腹すいた。
岩陰のバッグにあるものは全部食べてよろしい。お菓子はまだたくさんあるぞ。いつもはダメだが、今日は特別だ。
She ran off, and I turned around.
来やがったか。なんつう霧だよ。10歩先も見えやしねえ。
羊さん。
茶番は終わりだっつったよな。あ？
ああ、お待たせ、三辻。
なんだったんだよ、一連の茶番はよ。
いや、別れた彼氏を謎の方法で追ってきたんだと思って、全力でスルーしようかと。
聞くだけ無駄だった。てめえはそういうやつだよ、春秋。
君はいつも有言実行だよね。
こんなのは無理なんだいっつんだよ、バカ。
Behind her, there were 3 rubber boats with oars.
で、これからどうすんだっけ？
これから半ば放心状態の一団がやってくるから、適当に神様っぽいことを言って誘導して、適当な宿泊施設に保護。
後半はいいけど、前半は何なんだよ。
まあ、迷信とやり合うための方便ってやつさ。君だってある程度、ここがそういう場所だって分かってるんだろ。
まあな。めんどくせえ。
あのコンビニ店員のノリはやめときなよ。一応言っとくけど。
ありゃ相手がてめえだからやったんだからな。いくら俺でもあんな非常識じゃねえっての。
プレイだったのか。
マジで殺すぞ。
君の能力とかバックグラウンドとか後ろについてる組織だとか、そういうのは当然聞いていいんだよね。
まあもう会うことはねえし、聞かなくても問題ねえだろ。
そう言って別れて2週間くらいで再会したでしょうが、あれ何なの？もしかして本気で偶然？
偶然だと言いたいとこだが、まあ縁ってやつかもしれねえな。
本気で言ってるのか？
ああ、世の中そういうもんだからな。
本気の三辻ほど信じられるものはない。信じよう。
本気っぽく見えるてめえほど信じられないものはねえけどな。
We laughed.
で、そろそろ真面目な話しよっか。
もうすぐ俺は黒幕に捕まるぞ。
まだ耐えてたの？
まだってなんだおい。こっちは必死に時間稼いでるつもりなんだぞ。
なるほど。なるほど。だから何もなかったのか。オーケー。めちゃくちゃ助かった。じゃあなおさら、急がなきゃだ。
まあ、一応気をつけろ。
なんか君には父に赴く時を見送られてばかりだな。
父って。
まあさっきは助かったから次も助かるな。うん。
いいから無事に帰ってこい。別に迎えはしねえけど、死んだら後で寝覚めが悪い。
了解。まあ生きてたら一報入れるよ。
いや、考えてみたら、てめえが死んだらどのみちゲームオーバーだから、別にいらねえ、連絡。
ひどいな。やれやれ。ま、行ってくる。
まずは神様を殺したんだっけか？
ああ、次こそ君の要件。巻き戻りの黒幕とやり合ってくる。
Mission 2. I had to deal with the master of the loop, who wanted the monster's resurrection. This one didn't need as much preparation or acting skill as the first one. All the info I'd gathered over the loops was enough to make me certain by now. I just had to face the person one-on-one and be completely honest. That was easy. But the person was the problem. I'd probably be walking a fine line here. I had no idea how well my thoroughness, guts, and verbosity would hold up against the enemies. And once the final mystery was revealed, I wasn't sure I'd have what it took to properly retaliate. It was something I'd have to consider at the moment. I had to do it.
頼んだぜ、春秋。
I got up on the cliff again and hid near the graveyard. The mist was dense and I couldn't see much, but I was used to it, so straining my eyes helped a lot. I soon saw the people of Yasumizu absently make their way down Sadanaga. Everyone besides the old wolf guy was there. Good. After confirming that, I went to the plaza. He was standing alone in there.
逃げも暴れもしないとは意外ですね。いいですよ、そんなふりはしな。本来あなたの仕事でしょう。こういう例外的な逃亡の阻止は。
てめえと話したくてな。
ふりをやめてくれて助かります。手っ取り早く済ませましょう。
てめえ何者だ。俺と同類ってえのはわかんだけどよ、身車の手のもんにしちゃわけがわからねえ。じゃが
He was putting his hand into his clothes to take out a weapon, surely. Unfortunately for him, I already knew his cards.
俺の砦をようも崩してくれた。
僕はあなたの弟子ですよ。
はあ？
まあ面倒なので説明は省きますが、あなたがいなければ僕はみんなを助けることはできなかった。それに報いて生かしてやろうって言ってるんです、このクソじじい。
His eyes were filled with a silent anger.
まあ60年だか前の事件を今さら蒸し返しても警察も困るでしょうし、あなたが心を入れ替えてちゃんと安水を守る気を持つならこのまま生かしておいてもいいでしょう。
随分と大冗談じゃねえか。
身車は廃れますよ。
はあ？
今日は何も起きない。今後霧が立っても一切何も起きない。なんならいいことがあるかもしれない。あなたの仕事も隠れ家ももうありません。水路もすべて表にさらされるから。さらに安水の住人ももうあなたをただのボケ老人とは見なしません。
何の証拠で？
さっき気づきませんでしたか？あの場には銃を持った人間が2人いた。 知恵に以外のもう一人はずっとあなたを狙っていた。あなたが暴れた時、至近距離からあなたを殺すために。あなたは猛録した。あなたが人を殺せるのは霧の中で狼装束を着て神の意を借りてやっとだ。たった今あなたが僕に切りかかっても、僕はそれを余裕でかわし、転ばせ、踏みつけて殺すことができる。そうなるとせいぜい不意打ちしかできなくなるって言うんですよ。しびれ薬でも飲ませるとかしないとね。でももうそれも無理です。あなたがここに居座っても住人たちはあなたに心を許さない。ここはもうあなたの砦じゃない。あとは皆に頭を下げて死ぬまでかくまってもらうか、それとも東京のつて高を頼るなりどこへなり行くか、どっちかを選びなさい。
つまらねえことになったな。
十分楽しんだでしょう、あなたは。
いや、最後にもう一人。
え、
よけてみ、わけえの。
He raised his blade, took an unexpectedly fast step towards me, then tripped.
だから言わんこっちゃない。ああ、滑った担当が口から脳天に突き刺さって即死ですか。天網開会ってやつならもっと苦しい死に方にしてほしかったな。希代の悪人の最後としては。草が結ばれてる？誰だこんないたずらやったのは。その誰かには一応感謝しておこう。罪悪感を持たれてもあれだからほどいておくか。
Anyway, I was satisfied with the result. I thought about this and that, but as long as he was alive, he'd have always been a danger to someone's life. That was all he'd done his whole life, and it was best to accept his death for what it was. Leaving his corpse, I went off to where I had to. Of course, he wasn't the one in charge of the dream, so he wasn't my real target. Extra mission: get rid of the latent threat, the violent old man, completed. Mission 2, dealing with the master of the loop, who wanted the monster's resurrection, would begin now. Not in the dining hall or back home, huh? And maybe here? The culprit's plans must have changed badly because of Mitsuji's hard work.
こんばんは、リカ子さん。
She was right there.
あなたはどなた？
いいですよ、そういうのは。ご存知なんでしょう、全部。
不妻子春明様、お待ちしておりました。
The two acquaintances who'd never met exchanged a greeting. It was a very normal greeting, but that was what made it warped and strange.
そりゃ光栄だな。
でもこんな形では望まなかった。何も知らぬまま夢の中に遊んでおいていただきたかった。あの羊は仕留めました。ご心配なく。彼女はただ夢に触れる手立てを私に取り上げられた。ただそれだけのこと。再びよみがえる円環の中では彼女は無力なる観客として 指をくわえていただきましょう。
否定はしないんですね。あなたが全ての黒幕だということの。
先ほど望まなかったと申しましたが、私は存外喜んでおります。春秋様がそこまで私を知り、幾万の夜と命を賭してこの場に至ってくださったことに、長き宴の末にこのような日が来ようとは、私も思いもしておりませんでした。なればこそ知りとう存じます。春秋さん、どのように知られたのですか？私がすべての糸を主会と。
え？だってあなた、さっき全員が揃った場でいなかったじゃないですか。
え？それだけですか？
いや、違いますけどね。
お聞かせください。どのように私を突き止めたのかを。
Ah, she'd gone back to the heart of the matter. She'd probably punch me if I said something like, "You're a spider, of course you're pulling the strings." I'd take it seriously. Of course, there were things I didn't understand. Or more like, I understood because I didn't understand them, though that was kind of complex. It was the spider. The Uematsu guardian and symbol, the spider. Japan had no faiths that revered them. The other guardians had archetypes that were clearly related to mountain religions, even the wolves. The spider, however, wasn't. The Shinai faith was a religion created to control. Thus, there was no reason for it to include anything without a clear origin. In fact, it was completely unlikely that a family of prostitutes would use the Yorugumo, a term for orb weavers, as their messenger. After all, it was a yokai, not a god. Though the difference between them was minimal, but God still needed to gather faith. In other words, Yorugumo, Ugumo, and all that were just anomalies, strange incidences that would appear anywhere. Unless they garnered faith from the locals for many years, were accepted, and could live beyond just words, they weren't gods. However, the Uematsu actually had no divine authority, despite controlling the most mythical section of the Shinai faith. This was strange. Of course, the Uematsu had a weakness in that people looked down on them because of their nature. However, the amount of suspicion, cruelty, and harshness directed at you was just unnatural. And that was despite being a good person most of the time, unlike Kinosuke-san. I wondered why. The Uematsu had divinity in the Shinai faith too. That was when the spider archetype came to mind and turned my question into suspicion. The Uematsu, the spider, might have been some sort of exception in the Shinai faith, an unnatural entity. It seemed to me that the spider's god could be an outsider that didn't fit in with the mountain faith. The ritual to take in the corruption could have easily been the secret centerpiece behind the whole faith, no? It was a miracle that could cure everything, after all. It was something that any new religion would kill to have. Imagine all the adherents they could gain. And if it was the real deal, any cult or dogma with weird origins would forcibly add it into their teachings. That wouldn't have been weird, right? The historical documents proved that many outsiders had come to help create the Shinai faith. Some might have been people from some shrines that wanted to take the snake, monkey, or crow for themselves. Then, they also might have given themselves authority by putting their symbols in their teachings. The current village heads might have been the descendants of such people, though that could have been a stretch. Now, who was to say that the Umatsu ancestors didn't enter the settlement during this time and ram their symbol into their religion? Heretics who believed in a warped god. It was included in their religion, but only on a surface level. The truth behind it had been hidden by the Umatsu and wasn't included. That made everyone here unconsciously feel that there was something unnatural, something wrong about them. Thus they were looked at with scorn, and that was probably why they could take the disorderly profession of prostitution as their family trade. Though that was just an assumption. You could tell me if I was wrong later. Next, it was a time for doubts about her as a person. I had experienced the looping phenomenon. At first, I thought it was something that happened once I died. But then I realized that wasn't right. I'd keep my basis a secret, but I'd realized a few things once I thought about the loops that happened without my death. For example, there were loops that happened without me having any memory of dying. I'd underestimated it, thinking that it was only because some memories, especially ones of your death, weren't saved properly. However, there were definite loops that happened without me ever dying. It was just the general image of the loop that gave me the idea that the mist, death, and rebirth were linked, making me assume that I must have died. When I thought of it like that, I'd started thinking that the loop happened not with my death, but with the Dream Masters. That was the opposite of how it usually was in such scenarios. Normally the Master's death meant the end of the loop, but most people had died many times within all this looping. Looking at it that way, the loop should have stopped a long time ago. The Master should have died, yet the loop didn't end. Thus I began believing that the death of its Master activated the loop. That would make sense. After all, they could try again if they messed up. They could instantly take full advantage of the looping, as I'd first thought I had. Of course, it was possible that the culprit was in a safe spot far away, like Kamafujiyoshi or just in the mountains. That would make them impossible to reach, but they could reach this place all they wanted. Of course, the Miraguma observed Yasumizu from a distance, so they could have done that easily. However, there was something strange. I'd seen so many deaths. But there was one person whose corpse I'd never seen. It was Miko. No matter the route, I hadn't seen her final moments. That made her really shady. She'd seen that ending once, though, so I figured it wasn't her. She didn't know of the conspiracy. But there was someone else who seemed shady. It was you, Rikako Umatsu. I'd only seen your corpse once, when it was supposedly all over, but you were hanged in the hall. I'd looped soon after. Well, I tried killing myself then, but looking back at it, the mists were already there before I fell. The looping was strangely linked to the mist. For all I knew, I might have looped without actually dying. Besides that, I'd never seen any of your corpses. You were the only one who'd left the game in unusual ways. The chief example of that was the Yomibitsu transformation. You'd gone insane and been locked in. But you'd stayed alive to be alive, right? Even if your madness was real, it should have been possible for you to survive inside your house for a few days. If that was just some sort of act, you could have drank some water or hidden some food for yourself to survive. Well, I didn't think it was a complete act, but even so, your actions were strange. The reality that you took in the corruption of the feast actually made my suspicions for you all the more certain. The Yomibitsu transformation was just you taking Chaimi Serizawa's murder penalty for her, right? That had to have been impossible. After all, the Feast of the Yomi Purge was an artificial killing spree run by the Miguruma. It wasn't something that could be cured by your ability. However, if there was someone who knew about the cameras, the eye of Miguruma, and was capable of asking for something like that, someone who could bend the rules like that without undermining the Shinai faith, the Miguruma would readily accept their wish to die instead of the actual rule breaker. There had also been one time you told me to run. Had you expected for your desire to succeed for the same reasons? While thinking that you looked a bit shady, I'd found even more proof of that. If the culprits were really the Miguruma, like I'd said before, they were surely observing this monument too, or this moment too. They could use their safe position to easily press their loop button or something. I'd consider that the culprit had watched it from the mountain with clairvoyance or something, then reset everything at certain times. But the culprit seemed too naive for that. Anyone who watched enough would easily understand that I'd kept my memories. They would recognize me as dangerous and take care of me. That meant that the culprit had to have the perception of a normal human. Thus, to make something happen in Yasumizu, it had to be someone in Yasumizu. You being the culprit would also explain why you prepared Mako as a separate place. After all, you knew that the mist was coming. And lastly, you said this.
もし明日会えずともいずれまたいずれのせいでより穏やかなせいで巡り会えますよ。
That wasn't right, was it? The Shinai faith either denied or forbid resurrection. That was why they said, rise not. It was forbidden for some to go to Yomi, then come back. Someone who could say that was either part of a different faith or knew about the loops. I turned out to be right on that. One more thing.
きっかけはわかりません。あの日墓毛越しに春明様を一目見たその時から。
That was a mistake that I'd made several times myself. You'd said something based on memories of an event from a previous loop. I didn't think you were extremely careful in that regard, but you weren't above slipping up. You'd said those words in the timeline where I'd moved to Yasumizu. When we'd first seen each other then, you were behind a rock, one of the Okiba at the entrance to Yasumizu, not behind some leaves. And, well, that was the day after I'd crashed and ended up in Jamie-chan's room. Our very first meeting, right? You also had memories of the loops. From your perspective, did you have any other reason to hide that besides the fact that you were the one behind all this?
以上ですか。
ええ。不足ですか？
いいえ、十分です。私は先ほどあなたがここに現れるまでは何が起きているやら混乱、私がずらした夢の始まりが私の許しなく二度も揺り戻された。その解決に躍起になっておりました。そもそもあなたや芹沢様が夢に変化をもたらす理由も確信は何もありませんでした。ただあなた様の僕がもうやったというお言葉から少しは考えていたのですよ。
I knew I shouldn't have said that lightly.
もしそうならあなたがなぜか記憶を保っているならどれだけ素敵だろうと繰り返す宴の中自分たちだけが思い出を分かち合えるとなればね。
女性はそういうのが好きですね。
愛のみにて死ねる生き物ですから。特に植松の娘はね。
They sold love and lived by feeding off of it. That Didn't make sense.
あなたが愛を語るのは奇妙だ。
なぜ？
あなたの神は怨念の神だろ
そこまで知っておいでで。
う。消去法ですよ。あれだけの奇跡を起こせながら真意を感じさせないほど廃れた存在、忘れられた雲の神たり得るもの。植松家は土雲だ。この国の精神上の始祖である天津神の血族に滅ぼされた芦原の中津国の土着の民の末裔があなただ。その象徴するものは太古の現在、この国の民が心の底の底に秘めた最初の罪に対する罪悪感。今の自分たちの繁栄を大昔の虐殺の上に打ち立てておきながら、それさえ忘れていることへの危機感。それはこの国全体を覆っている薄い、しかし致命的な呪いめいた感情だ。そして感染者の母数が多すぎる。具現化すれば国を滅ぼすような天変地異を起こしかねないほどに。それが夢の中で抽象的に表現されたのがあの化け物ってところでしょうか。
お見事ね。
She smiled bewitchingly and applauded me. This wasn't the silent, bashful Rikako-san from before. This was an entrancing, shameless Uematsu, her mask as a prostitute. No, I didn't know which one was the mask at this point.
そう。私たちは、その身に夢の土雲を宿した怨念の一族。
She'd been acting bashful while hiding this sentiment in her heart.
その悲願は、大和の民の皆殺し。
With that as her sole goal, she'd praise the devotion and sacrifice of the people of Yasumizu and use them.
一度は叶ったその悲願を引き戻した。あの羊と春秋様のことを子憎らしく、今や愛おしい。
どういうことかわかりませんね。
あなたはすでにあそこにたどり着いた。だからあなたの記憶をその時点で止めて、それ以上のことを思い出さないようにしてしまえば、あなたは確実に同じ結末にたどり着いてくれる。
I couldn't deny that.
そうなれば、ああ、むしろ愛しくて愛しくてたまらない。愛しきあなたにこのように赤裸々に全てをさらけ出せる機会をくれて、私の身も心も今とても喜んでおります。
The sudden switch in tone and the content of her words made me dizzy. To me, she was actually more enchanting, adorable, and beautiful than ever.
あなたが愛しいのは野望を叶えてくれる存在ってだけでしょう。
いいえ、雲は貪欲よ。食べられるものはみんな愛おしいわ。嫌味ではないの。本当に愛おしい。大和の民は憎いけれど、それすらもはや愛おしい。彼らをすべて焼き滅ぼして、この腹の中に収めた。
She rubbed her abdomen.
そこで皆を地獄の気楽の夢へと誘いましょう。とこしえの官能に泣き叫ぶ1億の御霊を末永くとろかし慈しみ もてあそびましょう。だから私は本当に皆様を愛しています。
The spider's archetype was the Great Mother. That was what this reminded me of.
とりわけあなた様を。
She suddenly looked away like she was bashful. The situation was abnormal, but the gesture was one that could shake the core of any man.
わからない。ですよ。理解できない。
わかるわ、いずれ。ご存知なのでしょう。夢の土雲が復活する条件。
わかりませんよ。あなたの目的はあの化け物の復活。そのために読み意味の宴を繰り返す。意味不明だ。事実、その二つには直接的な関係は全くない。ただ怪物が復活したあの瞬間だけ宴の結果に極めて特殊な条件が発生していたのはわかる。それは霧が出た時点で休みずにいた藤吉村住人の全員があなたを除き死亡していたということ。
ああ、そこまで気づいて。
I knew it.
もしこれがあなたの目的なら、あなたがこんな異様で持って回った陰謀を起としたことには、なるほど、合点がいく。植松家には大量殺人を行える権能など存在しない。余震ば一人や二人殺せても、あなたの細腕では絶対に目的を遂げることはできない。その上、植松家は安水で敬遠または嫌悪されている。あなたは宴を生き残れない。だから殺し合いの機会を利用する。うまくいかなければ何度でもやり直す。ああ、そこまでは分かりましたとも。
That was where the final secret lay. It pissed me off, but I had to ask her directly.
しかし分からない。土雲の復活に関わる伝説上の根拠なんて安水にも上藤吉にもどこにも転がってない。そもそも狼と土雲は無関係だである以上、陰謀の正体とは宴を利用した大量殺人と考えるしかない。しかしそれでも藤吉村の人間がなぜ犠牲になるべきなのかわからない。黄泉の民として安水の住人が何人死ねばいいとか、そんな話かもしれないと思わなくもなかった。でもおかしい。上藤吉の人間である野里清之助氏が宴に招かれた理由がわからないからだ。なぜ彼だったのか、彼の属性ゆえか、ただの頭数なのか、それとも彼という個人が必要だったのか。少なくとも彼がここに投留することは実家に命じられた意図的なものだ。誰かの意図でそうなったんだ。それはあなたなのか。だとすればどうしてこの奇妙な取り合わせを犠牲として必要とした。それが奇妙で奇怪でいびつで不気味で岩で理不尽で不可解で怖くて怖くて怖くてたまらない。最後の謎だ。なぜあなたは彼らを殺す。
みんなかつて愛したから。
That voice, that smile, they were both those of a monster.
植松とは下方の民。一族の怨念は深い。しかし生き延びるために先祖の怨念を それがもたらす下法の権能を利用してきた。それこそ忌々しき引き取り。植松の闘士たる女がそのうちに宿す怨念の権化にして我らが神、夢の土雲。怨念の成就のため、この世のあらゆる害悪を、罪業を、大愛を奪い、貪り、蓄えんとする。大いなる汚れの雲をだまくらかして、奪った疫病を遮血して排出し、雲の復活を防ぐ。
So that was why she was covered in blood after taking something in.
そうして植松の闘士たる女を万能の厄払いの装置として乱用し、この国で生き続ける。そうやって植松家は堕落した。
使命を、悲願を忘れ、神の力を全く逆の方向に利用したのか。
ええ、その通り。しかし大いなる雲がそのような小賢しき企みに気づかぬはずがありますまい。密かに少しずつ疫病をため、やや子を産んでは逃がす。それを再び集めては蓄え、夢の土雲は植松の代々の当主はそうやって一族の目と灼血を逃れ、汚れをためてきた。
All right. Interesting stuff, right? But we'll stop it there for today. This is Odd Apostrophe. You've been watching Raging Loop on Nintendo Switch. Yeah, we're getting to the end, but don't worry, there's still more. I don't know if we'll even finish all of it. There's a lot more dialogue that comes after this by tomorrow, maybe another 2 days. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream. Yeah, it's a replay. The last part of the game wasn't working for some people.